All right, welcome to another episode of Let's Go Brandon Green. Now, today we have on the show author Jack Houston. Jack, how are you?
I'm pretty good, thank you. Thank you for having me.
No worries, man. Well, yeah, I was actually pretty excited when you made the call out to come on because you wrote a book, a pretty unique book, and it's about all the mishaps in hospital that you've seen as a nurse. And mate, some of these stories. What made you write the book?
Well, that's a good question. I was sitting around during the start of this pandemic, and I had just I retired now, and I couldn't sit still. I had to do something, and I guess I was thinking I should write something so my young lad knows kind of, when you're old and he can read about you, what you did, that kind of stuff. So I just was sitting on my dock one day, just started writing, and then a friend of mine, she encouraged me to try to get it published. So here we are. And I never intended to write a book. I just started writing some short stories one day, and I'm very surprised myself sometimes that I wrote it. But
yeah, because at the end of when you finish the book, you're like, "Wow, I did that," Yeah.
Yeah. It's I was never really a strong writer in school or anything. You know what I mean? Wouldn't have never. My family, when they find out I wrote a book, they're like, "Really?" It's kind of, but it's going over well, and so I'm actually working on my second one now.
Okay, what'll that be about?
Well, it's just basically a sequel to this one. It's going over well, so I'm just, that's a book of 36 short stories of things that have happened, but really, I could probably put 1,000 stories down. You know what I mean? I've worked for over 30 years in the industry, and
Yeah. So these things that happen, were they doctor negligence or like?
well, there's a combination. Some of them were negligence by the nurse. Some are just accidents, bad things that happen, and others are just outright criminal. Just somebody that's a horrible person doing a horrible thing, And, I don't want to paint the picture that all hospitals and nurses and doctors are evil people, but I'm trying to send the message to
You'd
people
hope
that,
not.
but sometimes people are given this hierarchy type thing. Like if you're a doctor, well, then you know everything, or you're a nurse in certain areas, people put you on this pedestal like, oh, the nurse said, I have to do this. But I want people to realize sometimes when either you or your family members in the hospital and something doesn't seem right, don't be afraid to speak up. Because often if your gut's telling you there's something not right about what's going on here, often you're right. You know what I mean? So
They
speak
don't
up
like
and
to be
ask
challenged,
questions.
though.
They don't like to be challenged?
Yeah, I've never seen a doctor like to be second questioned about his diagnosis.
No, they a lot of the time they don't like to be challenged. I mean, some are okay with it, but too bad. It's not really so much of a challenge if something's not going right, and you ask the question, "Hey, why does this happen? It doesn't seem right to me." Often they'll give you a good answer and it'll make sense, but sometimes it'll
Patient just
cue
wants a
them to
better
the idea like,
understanding.
yeah, but sometimes, when you ask a nurse a question or a doctor, they'll kind of stop for a minute and then follow it up with one of their questions, and then they'll realize, oh shit, this is wrong.
Yeah.
We need to change this.
Yeah. So
But
definitely talking is how you communications is one aspect of getting a diagnosis.
yeah, but most of the world is so busy now. Like nurses everywhere are so short staffed. You're lucky to ever see one during the shift. So you just assume everything's happening the way it should be, and it's not. It's really not, sadly.
Well, that is unfortunate, and that's what you've seen from Canada and USA.
Correct. Yeah, most of these stories are from the Houston area, some from Canada.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of bounced around a bit.
Right. And would you say you've seen much difference between the hospitals in Houston versus Canada?
Yes, in Canada, everything's paid for. So, I don't ever have to see somebody like in Texas, lots of times I've seen people selling everything they have, their house, their car, everything, so that their wife can get cancer treatment or things like that. Or I've seen people that, a new fresh motor vehicle accident, sometimes a spinal injury, if we treat it right away and get them in rehab, we can get them walking again. But, in Texas, if you run out of money, well, out you go. You're discharged. You know what I mean?
And you are kicked out on the street.
Well, I mean, yeah, basically. Well, they're not progressing well. No, they're not progressing well because they ran out of money.
Mm,
Everything's about money. And sadly,
right.
that's not the way healthcare should be, but it certainly is. Like, I've been in charge of a 55-bed medical surgical unit, so I'm the boss, and I have 22 patients myself.
Yeah.
So nobody's getting good care there. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. And so you are predominantly American.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
Most of these stories are from Houston, a few from Canada, but
Yeah. And would you go back and be a nurse again?
I think I might do some part time. Right now, I'm enjoying being done. You know what I mean? I'm done.
Yeah.
I'm doing some other things. Took a bit of an early retirement, and I don't know. I might go back and do a little bit of part time stuff. But I got to say, I'm kind of glad I missed the pandemic there, because that's, my goodness, my coworkers. I talked to some of them, and it's hell what they're going through.
Yeah. And it doesn't stop. Um, well, what about the fact that you were beginning to write like something you're talking about you're writing, and then it just turned into a book? It just yeah. So you were writing just a brief. One day you were just writing like one or two descriptions about your working life, and then it just became a book.
Well, when I got enough of them, I showed them to a friend of mine and a couple people, and they're like, "Yeah, you should publish it, get it made into a book." And I'm like, "Well, no, nobody. I don't think that's going to work." But anyway, I decided, what
And
the
you
hell?
you've self-published this, or how's
Yes,
it been?
yeah, I
Yeah,
self-published it. Yeah.
yeah. And where mainly are your sales been so far in the USA?
Most of my sales are in the U.S. It seems to be the biggest population. I guess a lot of them come from Amazon, but it's sold on 10 different platforms. Like in Australia, it's on the Amazon, there.
You can
And
get it digitally as well.
yeah, it's digital, and it's on all the major, about 10 different platforms that it's on. Of course, you can order it from any store as well. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And have you reached out to any publishers?
No, I mean, the one I dealt with, but I just went through them, and just
Yep.
starting the ball rolling here. I think once you self-publish, the publishers usually want to carry it right through from the start to the finish.
Yeah. Okay, and take over a bit. And also, who would be your main audience here? I'd say you'd get a lot of people coming into the medical industry, like nurses themselves. They'd be
Well,
interested in reading this.
I wish I knew the answer to that, because I've been trying to myself figure it out from, I wrote this for the layman, because every nurse has their own stories, but a lot of nurses are buying it, actually. And,
Yeah.
older people buy it. And I've had some young kids in their mid 20s buy it, a couple teenagers. And some of my reviews, I had a review, a young girl, I think she's 22 or 3. She put a nice review on there saying, "I was always thinking of being a nurse. Now I know I want to be a nurse for sure," and all this kind of stuff, which is nice to hear, because, I mean, and it meant something to somebody, right?
Yeah. What what about, have you had any feedback from nurses or doctors?
Yeah, I've had quite a bit of feedback. Most nurses will say, "Yeah, they start telling stories themselves. I remember a time like that, or this or that." But they say, it's a good book. It makes sense. It's very fitting for what they've seen in their experiences, that type of thing. But most of the best reviews, that are the more colorful ones and really complimentary, come from the layman, I think, because it's such an eye opener to them. You know, I think, like any job, you don't know what it's all about until you get doing it. And I remember when I was just a student, my dad said, "Well, it shouldn't be that hard to be a nurse. Give an old lady a pillow, tuck her in. Somebody's got a headache, give them a pill." And I'm thinking, can you imagine? Like, that's the way some people think of a nurse. Like,
Yeah.
we
Hospitals are busy places.
we
And
do a little more than that.
how long were you a nurse for?
I think it's around 32 years. So
Wow. So you're not just someone who just came in, was a nurse for a year or two, and wrote a book and said, "I'm out."
no,
You've
no, and in fact, whenever we'd have a crisis at work or something big go down, and you'd be frustrated, somebody was always saying, I remember this one guy was always saying, "Oh, you could write a book about this place," and I'm always thinking in the back of my head, I probably should do that, write a book, and you think
well,
about
yeah,
that,
and
and then when I
watch all
retired,
the TV shows, House, and all that. That's you're the real life. That they
yeah,
make TV shows on this stuff. Yeah,
yeah. Only thing with this is they're all real stories and they're not made up, but some of them are kind
and
of
you've got
hard
a
for
wide
people to
range
hear.
of stories like a rape, and you work in the psychiatric wards.
Right.
Yeah, and the rape, I believe, was just things that should not have been
Well,
going on.
it was horrible. I didn't know what to think when I first went in the room. I see this guy, he's got her diaper to her knees and he's on top of her trying to get off and trying to get dressed, and he's yelling at me, "We need time for our marital duties." And she was just petrified because she didn't know him anymore. She had been in a coma. She come out of the
Yeah.
coma, but so much brain damage, she didn't know him. So it was clearly abuse. So, I put a stop to it. Well, I threw him in the hall, really, and called the doctor, called the supervisors. Okay, we're going to have to talk to him. We're going to, he's got to come to terms with things. And, this just isn't right. And I thought everything was left in good hands. You talk to your supervisor and the doctor, apparently it wasn't. I went away and I come back after a few days off, and they got rid of my notes even. They even took my notes that I charted on the issue and
They
got
just
rid of
wanted
them.
you to. It's easier that if nothing's said, I guess that's what they were thinking.
Yeah, but they got rid of my notes. They even tested her to see if she was pregnant, and they luckily she wasn't. I found my notes; they were put in the old storage, But so then I flipped out and I said, "That's enough. I'm going to the state police." And Marvin Zenner, the big guy that uncovers everything at the time down there, big news reporter, and
Yeah.
then my manager slapped me in the face. She hit me hard. She's a big girl. She hit me like I seen stars. I thought I'm going to
A
faint
lady.
here. And anyway, all of a sudden they had 3 doctors in and writing on the chart, he wasn't allowed to be near her. She's not competent. So, I mean, everybody knew that, but none of the women would say anything because they're afraid of losing their jobs, right?
Mm.
This was a rich person, paying for a wing of a hospital, something like that. So it's a sad state of affairs. I mean, I didn't do anything any normal guy wouldn't do. It's not right. You just put a stop to it, right? But
Yeah. It just goes to show that in even a place like a hospital has a culture where they let things that shouldn't happen.
well, and
just for the
not
sake
all
of-
hospitals are like that, but this particular group, it was a bad deal. It was just sad,
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. And
Yeah.
also, you would have seen some pretty crazy stuff in the psychiatric wards, and
Oh yeah, yeah. There's
like dealing with those people, you'd want a lot of security, I guess. There,
well, we were the security. When that's the thing, people think there's always security there to help you out, but on a psychiatric ward, the nurse is the security, the nurse, the caregiver. We're everything. We do it all. Even they get in trouble, they get in a fight, we have to wrestle them in, put them in a seclusion room or put them in restraints. So we get hurt a lot. We get hurt an awful lot. Like it's just, actually, I read some stats that the worst job in North America, I imagine it's the same throughout the world, the worst job for being injured is nursing. More so than a police officer or fireman. That's the number one thing that people would think, But no, it's a nurse, and a psychiatric nurse gets hurt worse than any other, because if they attack you, there's a lot of people, they can't help it sometimes. I mean, sometimes they can, but sometimes they're out of their mind. They can't think straight. Well, you can't just start putting the knuckles to them. I mean, it's not a fight. You have to restrain them without hurting them. So we get hurt. You know what I mean? It's just, it's a terrible thing, but
yeah, and that wouldn't, like, you've worked in prisons as well. Like, that wouldn't get any rougher than that.
Yeah, a lot of the prisons tend to get a lot more death threats in there, and It's pretty brutal. We do get a lot of death threats. It's terrible, and we get beat up a lot there. And if you're a nurse, the guy might get locked up for a day or two, but if you're a guard or the warden and they threaten you, you're locked up or shipped out. And but it doesn't seem to be the same if you're a nurse. Well, big deal.
Yeah, you just got to. They just send you in because there's there'd be a lot of people, studying nursing, listening to this, and then thinking, what am I getting myself into?
You're right. I mean, I tell young people, like, we need nurses, so I don't want to drive people away from it, but this is what you really need to know. This is what you're really in for a treat, because it's not what you think.
Colorful career.
Yeah, very colorful. Yeah.
And the other thing about all these events, when did you realize, how long through your nursing career were you like, wow, this is a bit mind blowing? What goes on being a nurse?
That happens right off the bat.
Oh, really? Yeah.
As a student, you're exposed to enough, you think it's mind blowing, and yeah.
Yeah, because I actually have heard of people that left university and college because they couldn't hack it after just 6 months of it. Like, this is not for me. Yeah,
there's a high dropout rate. I think. In fact, I think I was just talking about this with the fellow. We started with, my class was 86 people, and we finished with 19.
Oh.
So that's a pretty high dropout rate.
Yeah, you've got to be like, I'm definitely not built for that. That's I'm not a serious person like that. That's yeah.
Well, a lot of people say that, but then they get doing it, and you realize you can do a lot more than what you think.
Yeah, you just do what's in front of you. Yeah, I understand.
Yeah.
But yeah, it does take a tough person to be one of those 19 from 86 or whatever you just said.
Yeah, it's a very academically, it's very hard. There's a lot of stuff you have to know. People think that, well, the doctors make all the decisions. Well, yeah, they do, but before the doctor ever sees them, it's usually a nurse. And when you're on the floor, a doctor doesn't see them in the middle of the night. If you've got chest pain or belly pain, it's the nurse that does the assessment and says, oh, they're having a heart attack, we better call the doctor. Or no, it's just gas. It's, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, we actually know quite a bit. And if we don't do our job right, well, then people can die, right? So
whatever happens if the nurse, like, your job obviously isn't to diagnose someone, but in the case where a nurse does see that it's not what the doctor diagnosed, does that happen? Then the challenging begins.
Yeah,
again,
it does.
From the patient, from the nurse.
It does happen, and sometimes I've done this myself. I've challenged a doctor or questioned the doctor, and many times they'll say, well, but what you're forgetting, Jack, is because of this, this, and this, that doesn't apply. Yeah. And, and sometimes they give me a good explanation. It's like, oh, okay, I get it now. And other times they're shaking their head and they're like, really? Well, wait a minute. And they take another look at it, so it happens a lot. And if it's a good doctor, they'll listen to the nurse. And often, even if the nurse is wrong, they'll explain it, and the nurse will know the next time the difference, But some just don't want to hear it.
Well, they're not a doctor. You guys have been around a hospital just as long or even longer in these. Like, you aren't as dumb as the patients at all, and you're definitely somewhere in between.
Right, and someone like me, I've been at it for over 30 years. You get a new kid coming out of school, they're technically a doctor, but if they think they know more than I do about everything, that's not the case.
Experience. Experience means way more than just the word experience.
Yeah,
you're 100% right. And one other thing, in your book, you've talked about inequality. What do you mean by that?
Like inequality, through how did you mean? Where did you read that, in a story, or like racial inequality, or?
Yeah, like you've got racism and inequality there.
Yeah. So there's 2 or 3 stories that deal with that. Like, there's racism everywhere, but I found the further south I went, the worse it got. And it was a real eye opener. I'd never seen blatant racism until I went to work in Houston. And there's a lot of it goes on right in the hospital. I remember a nurse tech one time in my book. It's called it's about. There's a minister, and so basically, he was having some bowel problems. He had to go to the bathroom, and the nurse tech went in to help him, and she was black. And I heard a commotion, him yelling and swearing at her, and threw a box of Kleenex at her. She runs out of the room, and I said, "What's going on there?" And it's like he's calling her the N-word, yelling at her. Don't. And I went in the room and don't send any of those dirty N's in here, And this is a minister yelling at the girl that's wiping his bum, helping him to do the pottying. And he got away with that, And, well, he was getting away with it. I kind of stepped in. He didn't after that because
how old was this guy?
He requested that only I take care of him.
Mm.
So I took care of him. I said, okay, but I'm the head nurse. I don't have time to be doing this. That's her job. Don't send them in.
And was this like an old guy a long time
I made him wait 2 or 3 hours. What's that?
Was this like an old guy a long time ago?
Well, this is about 30 years ago, almost 30 years ago. Anyway, I told him I would come when I had time. He said, that's fine. And I knew he had just got a big enema. And so by the time I got back in the room, there was literally stool running off the end of the bed onto the floor, and he was crying. And I said, well, there was just those dirty end people that you don't want in here. Yeah. You know what? He said, send them in, and he apologized to every one of them on the floor over the next week because his behavior was so bad. And I'd have lost my job if they'd known I just let him sit there and, dirty himself. But he was very rude and ignorant with her.
So he had all his marbles.
Oh, he had all his marbles. Yeah, it's the racism down there. It's just, it's okay to do that. Another time I had
there's still racism down there?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, lots of it. There's lots of it down there. And, I'd never really seen it until I went down there. We've seen it, or you hear jokes. People tell off-color jokes and things like that. But down there, when you see a patient being able to treat a nurse like that, or the nurse treating the patient like that, right out in front of everybody, I'm thinking, what do they do when nobody's around, to see how they act? I was working with a young lad one time. He was shot several times, and he was just coming to, and a black fellow, and the police officer started saying, why are you working so hard to save that dirty N-word? This is in the ER in front of everybody. I thought, can you imagine that poor kid in the cruiser, what he have to deal with when nobody's around? And it was fine for them just to say that. Nobody would question him because he's a police officer,
Yeah.
And that's just, there's a lot of that goes on in the hospitals, and it shouldn't. It shouldn't. But, somebody's sick and they have to.
But that's not happening these days. That's just stuff you see off movies and old movies.
Well, that was a while ago, but I would assume it's probably still going on to a degree,
Yeah, I'm not too familiar with Texas or anything. A lot of Mexicans and Hispanics down there, isn't there?
Yeah, there's another component.
I'd imagine the hospital would be full of everyone, every race.
Yeah, there was a lot of Spanish people where I was. Probably 25% of the patients would be Mexican, and which created other problems because a lot of them couldn't speak English, so there was a language barrier, and that's very difficult to treat somebody. Yeah,
they do have a lot of Spanish signs and everything in the state of Texas to cater for the residents there. Man, well, it sounds like quite a career to be a nurse and become one and stay one for so long. And the book will be and is well received by many that have read it. It has good reviews. And it must be being the reason why you're writing another one, a follow-up.
Yeah. I found when I was writing it that it was kind of, relaxing or kind of therapeutic in a way.
That's what they say,
Yeah. I mean, that's something I tell my patients all the time when I've been doing therapy with them and stuff. But then I was doing it myself, and I found it was good. In fact, a couple of the stories were kind of hard to write. I had to go back to them 2 or 3 times because you'd tear up and make you pretty sad, because of the things you're writing about, and they still stick with me this many, many years later, some horrible, horrible things that you see.
That you do see. All right. Well, we look forward on your next book. You'll have to come back on and tell us about that. But so one last time, where can people, get in contact with you or buy the book?
Okay, well, the easiest way is if you go to my website, it's Nurse Jack, just like the book, nursejack911.com. And from there, all my email and there's about 10 different places listed there that you can buy the book readily online, or you can go to pretty well any bookstore and order it. They'll order it in for you if you want. And there's the e-books are out there, So a lot of people tell me they buy it off of Amazon, seems to be one of the big places, and Indigo and Barnes and Noble. But yeah, just when you go to the main website, if you scroll down, it shows you a whole bunch of places you can buy it.
Yeah, we've seen that before. So just jump on Amazon usually, and then grab yourself a copy.
Yeah, that's what a lot of people do. But it's available many places.
Yeah,
it's just getting it out there in front of people. That's the trick, okay?
That's what we're doing here, man. All right, Well, Jack. You have a great evening, and thanks for coming on the show. And like I said, we'll look forward on the second book as well.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate your time.
No worries, Jack.
Okay, well, you have a good day.
You too, buddy.
Okay, bye.